So it looks like a number of you need ice. So I've been playing around with an ice shader, trying to get sort of icy worlds going and trying to get in a unique kind of look. And I think this is starting to go down the right roads with the lighting. It's got some nice feel to it. Has that icy kind of feel. We could start adding other colors into the map or whatever. But the texture is pretty straightforward. This one, I think this is my ice here. So it's a tileable texture. It's 100% tileable. There's no seams. Painted it in Krita with just a big brush and added a little bit of purples and blues, and you can see it's deathly simple. Just enough to get some variation. And yes, that's actually coming out as these colors now because of the way I'm pushing the values. I created a normal map for it using um, normalize, and so there's the normal map for it, just so I could get some form to it as well, and that's what I'm getting in there. So let's do one up and let's see if we can get a nice ice shader going. Now, if you also notice, and we're going to try and do that as a second pass, I also have snow on the top, which is kind of cool. So what this means, if you take a piece and you actually rotate it over, you'll notice that the top is always covered in snow, and then the sides are always ice. And that's due to the way I'm blending some items together here. Now, what I've also got, it looks like it's poking out here a bit. I have just piles of sort of snow I'm utilizing, and I'm sticking those everywhere to soften sort of transitions and whatnot. You can't even see them blend in because the edge of this is the same texture as the top of this, and it just sort of blends together, and they're all what's called the world aligned texture. So let's take a look at that and start playing with that to start with. I'm going to just use um, two objects we're going to work with to get this right. And I'm going to have a box and a sphere here. And I'll just make that bigger. So we've got these two objects now that we're just going to test our texture on so you see what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new material, and we're going to make what's called a world aligned material. So now world aligned textures. This is my texture so far, and yes, it looks complicated as anything. But I'm going to try and simplify some of this stuff for you, but this is effectively what we're building. All of this stuff in here is just for doing color corrections and tweaks on it. It's nothing fancy. I'm just multiplying and adding to values. That's all I'm doing is just using multiplies and adds. So it's not so bad. It's this here that we need to take a look at first. And we're going to start with one of these, and we're going to be using the world aligned texture. So I'm going to jump over, and I'm going to go in and create a new material. Right click, new material, and it's going to be M for material underscore. I'm going to call it world align WA underscore generic. So it's a generic world align texture, and then we can be able to swap out the textures as we go. So I'm just going to double click on it because we're going to make material instances of this to be able to utilize it. So here's our shader. This is our shader. And of course, the entire thing is the material. And now we're going to need some textures in there and dropping those in. But let's first go ahead. I'm just talk about the difference here. So this is a texture sample. With a texture sample, I can go ahead and I can find I think it's just called ice, isn't it? Yeah, there it is, ice D. So this is the ice texture sample. If you use a texture sample node, it is using the texture coordinates on your object, okay? Now I haven't unwrapped any of these, and again, if you watch what happens when I move one of these, for instance, if I grab this and I move it, you'll notice that the ice on the top, the snow on the top stays put. It doesn't move with it, and the ice down the side doesn't move with it either. So instead of using the UV coordinates on the object like you guys are used to doing, what it's doing is it's projecting it. So in 3 different axes, it's projecting the ice on. So I'm just going to open up my screen drawing tool here. And so what it's doing is it's projecting a texture on from this side, and straight down. Okay. And then what it's doing is it rounds over the edge, and the edge is round. It blends those 3 together, so that it has, we can choose sort of how much soft edge there is and how it blends. And around the corner from these 2 sides, as it rounds the corner, it starts blending them together. So it's actually a mix going around the side here. You can sort of see them crisscrossing each other, but who cares? It looks good enough. It's snow and ice, right? So back to our generic texture. That is a texture sample that's going to use our UV coordinates, not what we want. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to look for World Aligned Texture. So World Aligned, there's a bunch of different ones. We're looking for World Aligned Texture. And so what this world aligned texture does is this is going to project that UV coordinates in world space in X, Y, and Z in world space. Okay. And so this is how they're going to stay put. So you can see we can actually output just the Z, so just the top, the X and the Y, or the X, Y, and Z. We're going to always use this X, Y, Z. So this is going to go into our base color. I'm going to produce our base color. Now what we need to do is tell it what texture we're going to use. You're going to see it says texture object input. So I'm going to take the texture sample and plug it, and you'll notice I can't. And the reason you can't is it's looking for a texture object. This is a texture sample. It's sampling the texture that is been imported in. What I want to do is I actually want to convert it to a texture object. Texture object isn't making any changes. It's like a direct connection to the texture map in a sense. So when I right click texture object, I can plug that in now, and I'm going to get this world aligned texture. So I'm just going to hit save on this and apply, because you always have to make sure you apply. And right out of the gate, we're going to go find our sphere in our box again. And I'm going to immediately go and make a material instance of this. So I'm going to go in and right click material instance, and I'm going to call this MI for material instance. I'm going to put a WA for world aligned, and then I'm going to call it test for test ice for now, because I want to get rid of it out of my scene when I'm done. And of course your initials go on the end, and that gets put into your material instances. And in your material instances, we go look for that one. And I'm going to put it on these 2 here. So we got the material. I'm going to drop that there. Now you're not going to do that on yours. You're always going to do it on the asset itself down here in the asset library. Okay, so do not drag and drop them to here. Do not drag and drop them to here. Watch my tutorials on it. So what you'll see now is that this texture has been placed on all 3 angles. So watch what happens when I rotate this box around. You'll see that the texture is actually sliding. I know it's kind of hard to see because the texture isn't really obvious, but you can see it's not rotating with it. Okay, same thing with the sphere. It's actually not rotating with it. So it's being projected on all axes. The material instance, I'm going to open that up so we have it. And so there's the parent material. That's this here that we're building. So let's start adding some parameters right off the bat, so we can, in our material instances, because we don't just have to have one, we can have many of the same material. We want to be able to control things like texture size. So hold down 1 on the keyboard and left click. I want to make a float value. I'm going to plug it into texture size. Right click on it, convert to parameter. We're going to call this texture size from now. And by default, I happen to know that the world aligned texture defaults to a size of 100. So we're just going to default it to a size of 100. I'm going to save everything, and it'll apply this automatically when I save it all. And now you're going to see that I have a texture size that I can go and play with. So I can just pull this down, go back to my scene, And you're going to see that I'm going to be able to go in and say texture size and manipulate the texture size. Okay, so we're going to want to be able to do that. So we can play around with the texture size a bit and mess with sort of the overall look of this. So we want a couple other things going on here. I'm just going to dock that back. We want to control a few of these other parameters. One, we want to be able to control the normal. So with the world align, it's actually world aligned normal that we need for the normal map. So world aligned normal, we're going to plug in here. So we're going to use the XYZ texture. I have no idea what the flat top does. I've never bothered looking at it. And that's going to go into there. And then we need another texture object that is going to be the correct texture object. So we can grab this one. I can just go Control W and load that up. And then I want to go in and find the ice N that I've got. And ice N is going to be my normal map for it. And I'm going to go and plug that in. And we want these to scale the same size. So we don't need another one of these. We're just going to reuse that. So when this value changes, it changes the size of both of these. Now, right now, it'll be showing some normal, but we want to control how much normal we've got. We want to be able to push that up and down. So if I just hit apply there and go take a look, you'll see that it's starting to look a little bumpier. Okay. And we want to be able to control that in our material instance and have a texture size here. So the way you do that, I'm going to right click, and this is in a bunch of tutorials, with a flatten normal. Okay. And we're going to plug the texture into the normal and then the flat normal back into our normal again. Now we need to control the flatness. Now what's weird about flat normal is at 0, we have full normal. And at 1, it flattens it, or flatness, which is kind of odd because that's backwards of what you'd expect from a user perspective. I would expect user to think that 0 has no normal and 1 would have full normal. Okay, so let's set this up and we'll make sure that it makes sense. So this is going to be normal amount, convert to parameter, normal amount. Okay, but we're going to just drag out of here and type in 1, O-N-E, for 1 minus. And this 1 minus node will basically invert this value. So it'll flip it over for us. So it's 1 minus this. So 1 minus 0 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. So it flips it over. So I'm going to plug that into the flatness. And we can just hit save again so that it's the apply button's clicked. Now you can see that I have a normal amount here as well. So we'll just pull that off. And you'll see now with a default of 0, there's no normal. Crank that up, I start getting a whole bunch of normal. So I can go and control how much normal I have. Now we also want to be able to affect our roughness. So how much roughness is here? So we want to play with that. Now, one of the things I like to do is be able to use a variation of things. So we're just going to use this, and really it's just sort of taking the grayscale value of this, and we could plug that into roughness. But we want to be able to control how much roughness there is. So I'm going to create a multiply node, okay? And that's just holding down M. And then again, I need to hold down 1 and left click again to bring up our float value. And again, if I show that, where is it? Window, palette. Okay, you'll see these here, the constants. So I've got a constant 1, or you can just drag it out of here, right? It's way easier just to hold down 1 and click. So we're going to multiply, and if you multiply something by 0, you'll get nothing. So maybe we'll start with that with this one, and I want to say convert to parameter, and this is going to be roughness. And if I hit apply again, or save it, whichever you want to do, and you'll see now it's shiny because the roughness is set to 0. Okay, so we can go back and now we can play with the amount of roughness. So you can see that we can kind of control how shiny that is or not. Okay, really we could clamp that value between 0 and 1 if we wanted. It might be wise to do. And so to do that, because we turn this into a parameter, you can see min slider, max slider. If they're both set to 0, it's unlimited, but I can easily now just set that to 0 to 1, and it'll actually clamp it off in the material instance. You won't be able to go below 0 or above 1 because that's full roughness or no roughness. You might want to start your material with a default value of 1 so that it isn't rough by default when you go and add these, and you have to add that in, and you can dial that up and down. So that's going to control that roughness now. Now the other one we might want to control is the emissive value, and emissive is like making something glow. And that's what I've done to sort of try and make it look like light's passing through it. It's a cheat, okay? So ice kind of has that glowy effect because it's a subsurface, scattering effect that's happening, and the light is entering it and then kind of bouncing back out of it, making it almost kind of look illuminated. We're just going to cheat that for the reason of speed with the emissive. And what we can do is we can do the exact same sort of thing to play with our emissive color. So I'm going to go with a multiply again, M, and left click. I'm going to plug it in. I'm going to plug it into emissive, 1, left click. I'm going to plug it in, and I'm going to go ahead and convert to parameter, and this is emissive. And we're going to leave it at 0 by default. We're going to let it be clamped off, and let's say apply, and let's just pull that down. And so you can see they're not glowy. Turn up my emissive now. I can actually get it to sort of go a little glowy, so I can see it, starting to, create that effect going on. Now, the other thing I can do is start playing with, I think I'm just going to shove this off to one side like that so I can get back to it easier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a way to push the contrast of this so that I can make it more or less contrasty. Right click, and we're looking for contrast, and we're looking for cheap contrast, okay? And so it's going to get plugged in here, and I want it to affect that cheap contrast. I want it to affect maybe the roughness and the anisotropy, or not anisotropy, emissive color, roughness and emissive color. So I can just plug these in so that it's in between there. And now we need a contrast spinner, same thing, 1. And I'm going to go convert, and this is contrast. And we can plug that in. And so you can see the contrast is down to 0. We probably want to start it at 1. Oop, contrast. Did I do the right thing? Cheap contrast. Okay, figured out what I did wrong. I'm using the wrong cheap contrast. That's for float values. So we want cheap contrast RGB. There we go. So I'm going to plug that in. I'm just going to replace that, and then these plugged in, and that should now be correct. Yeah, stayed blue. Okay, so now I can go in and I can crank up contrast. I've got my emissive. I can make it kind of glow. I've got my normal amount, and I've got some roughness. So I can make it rough or not rough. And we probably want our roughness set to a value of 0 for ice. And so we get this nice icy kind of looking, look to it. So that's starting to look like ice for our sides. But, the question is how have I gone about plugging in the white on top so that I always have snow on top? And so this is going to take a little bit more understanding. So I'll come back in the next video and we'll discuss how to do that. But this should be able to get you, basic ice kind of look to things so that you can, play around and get it to look kind of icy, okay? We could also do other color corrections and whatnot, but it should get you started as we start building materials and updating them. Back in a sec.